there was something in me that was really wanting to kind of get out and express myself and do wild plugins.
That's mastering engineer Noam Levinberg, the man behind Safari Pedals. Safari Pedals has become one of the most talked about plugin companies around. Their unique guitar pedal-inspired interface has brought the fun of wildly spinning knobs right into our DAWs. In this episode, Noam shares his process for taking a plugin from idea to final release.
What I like doing is starting from the end and not from the beginning. And what I mean by that is
why he chose to echo a modern music release schedule by dropping a new plugin every month.
It matches today's kind of pace, and it's 100% inspired by artists and musicians that I respect.
The importance of creating something that draws a reaction from the user or listener.
It gives you some sort of reaction, like you like it, you don't like it. The first few seconds, for most people, I think, would probably lead to either buying it or not.
And why he chose to walk away from a salaried audio gig to start Safari Pedals.
And I had to trust my gut feeling and just do what I love, which is something that a lot of times is like the opposite of what everybody's telling you to do.
This is a fun one. We hit it all from plugins to commercial studios and the current state of audio knowledge on the internet. So stick around for my interview with Noam Levinberg. There are so many great boutique plugin companies like Safari popping up these days. Most of them are started by talented engineers and mixers that are kind of probably still like midway through their career. We're not talking about people with like 40 years of experience. We're talking about like 10 or 15. They're in it right now. I see so many people loving these small plugins, and I'm not seeing as much love for the legacy brands that we all grew up with. Is it like do you feel like there's like new blood in this industry? Like, is it a revolution of plugins right now? Like why has everybody got a cool plugin company now?
It's a really interesting topic to talk about, and it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time now. A bunch of things led to this situation, in my opinion, and I think it's a really good change in the industry. I think that the biggest thing that led to this new rise of a lot of small companies is the fact that technology-wise, plugins are way easier to program than ever before because of JUCE Framework, which is a framework made for audio processing, which is based on C++, which is what everything is written on in terms of plugins and stuff. And it's just way easier to create plugins these days. And that combined with the fact that, the whole creator economy and people now have more access to tools that we didn't have early on. So I think when I look back to my early career, when the computer kind of came into the studio, I mean, yes, you had some plugins. You had like the Q10 from Waves. Yeah. I remember that being like shocking.
Yeah.
I remember being shocked by having 10 bands, being like, what can I do with 10 bands? That's crazy.
It's true.
I also remember like having a lot of issues with the computer and like bugging out about space and stuff. And that was like a really expensive, I don't know, like G4. I think it was a G4 computer.
Yeah.
That was worth a couple of $1,000. I couldn't imagine having a laptop and just running, Pro Tools on a laptop or anything even remotely similar to that back then. And I think that today people have much better access to technology tools and cheaper in terms of, hardware, which leads them to have more space in their budget to get creative with plugins and other like cool tools. You know what I mean?
It's totally true. The cost ratio between, buying hardware, gear, and plugins is like obviously, massive, especially when you talk about using, with UAD, for example. Like I can have a Fairchild on every channel for $300 or whatever they want to charge for it. So yeah, no, that is true. Do you think that there's like, I think about like early audio development, most of the big breakthroughs I think were done with or by users. Think about like Les Paul or like George Massenburg, just game changing devices. And then you've got people that come in like Rupert Neve, really just electronics and technical side. Do you think you need to be an end user to kind of have the aha moment? And then you got to bring in like the brains to expand on it?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's not a yes and no answer, because there are people from both camps. I mean, my camp is obviously the end user camp,
Yeah.
so I don't have a background in programming or anything similar to that, and I feel like there still is some sort of like gap between the two. So when I want to build a product or a plugin, I kind of need to go through a bunch of loops in order to even explain
Right.
myself to a programmer, to say like what I'm looking for and what I want it to sound like. And the other side doesn't always fully get what we're talking about, because we might be technical as engineers, but not as technical as developers.
Right.
So when you say something has a character, or something has like even like, oh, I want it to saturate. Okay, what is a saturator? That means, obviously that means distortion, but then there's like a million different ways to make something distort. And then, it's a long journey.
Yeah.
And I feel like the best kind of goal is to get to a point where either there's two people and they're having a conversation. And what I mean by that is like an end user and then a programmer, and they can kind of, create something together. Or there's these like type of superhumans that I've met a few that can just do everything. And that's just like a next level thing. It's kind of like when there's like a producer who can play all the instruments and mix,
Right.
and you're like, oh, that guy, like, that's insane.
Yeah.
So there's the same thing in, there's like an equivalent in the plugin world, like somebody like Eyal Amir, for example, who's like a friend of mine who has a company called Modalics. So he's like amazing piano player, but then also an amazing programmer and an engineer and like a bunch of other things. So
That's
he
amazing.
has it all, I guess. But yeah.
What's the process of, determining whether a plugin is working for you? Like, is it, you have to, obviously you're going through different versions. You're probably using it in your own work, maybe sharing it with some friends. I guess take one of your plugins that's out, maybe like Gorilla Drive, right?
Yeah.
What was the process like getting that to market from the audio standpoint? Like, how many iterations of the plugin did you go through?
I think I'm still learning the process, to be honest, and I'm trying to improve it.
Yeah.
In general, I will say that I did get to a point right now that I feel like is kind of a sweet spot in terms of the way it works. And basically what I like doing is starting from the end and not from the beginning.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is I'll usually sketch out the GUI myself before having anything.
Okay.
So I'll just like paint a picture and try and kind of decide where I want the knobs and what I want them to look like, and kind of match whatever I have in my head to a picture. And I think that really helps my process, because once you do that, you realize like, oh, there's not enough space for like a blend knob. Maybe I should make, the knob smaller, but then I want it to look a certain way,
Yeah.
And by the end of it, you kind of have like a visual representation of something that you want. And what I like doing after that is I actually show it around. I showed it around to like a bunch of people and try to explain them what I want it to do.
Yeah.
And I look at people's faces when I do it, and like just friends, and other engineers and stuff. And I want to see they understand, the concept of the plugin before it even lands on a actual audio file.
Right.
That's kind of the beginning. And I will say that like the Gorilla Drive was the first one I did. And I didn't do that on the first one. And I kind of learned as I went along. But some of them did have some major changes done to them following, what people said. Because a lot of times, like, you have something in your head, you're like, oh yeah, of course this tone knob is going to react this way. But then when you ask somebody else, he's like, what does a tone knob do? And you're like, oh, yeah, it doesn't say. So maybe I should label it some way. So a good example for that is, like, I'm going to release next month. I don't know when people are going to listen to this, but in late October, early November, there's going to be a compressor coming out. And I have a knob there called Speed. And it's a long thing, but I won't get into it right now. But the whole idea is to link the attack and release in certain ways that fit the ratio of the compressor.
That's cool.
I it's a pretty fun compressor to play around with.
That's fun.
But when I showed it around to friends, they didn't really get it. They were like, what do you mean speed? Like, where's this going? So what I did was I kind of drew like this thing where you can see like slow and fast, and it kind of represents it in a visual way.
Nice.
But then after that, what I usually do in terms of developing the plugin is I'll take that GUI and then I'll show it to the developer that I'm working with, which is usually a guy called David, who's a super talented programmer. He's a freelancer, basically. And we'll go through the features and stuff. And something that David, I think, is a genius because of of this thing is instead of me explaining to him what I want, I basically have sort of like a back office of sorts of plugins. So I have like a library of compressors and EQs and a bunch of other things that I can make it sound any way I want on my end. It looks terrible. Like the GUI is very non-user friendly. It kind of looks like a mix of, I don't know, like a bunch of stuff.
Right.
But it's a tool. It's a tool. And I can basically do whatever I want with that. And then I can kind of send it the vid's way with the GUI, and he takes the two and makes it one.
That's awesome.
That's like a very long answer to your question.
It happens. You said speed. You're talking about that compressor plugin, and I immediately thought to myself, I bet that's controlling attack and release at the same time in some kind of like musical context, which kind of made me think about the idea of like you're making sonic choices based on your taste and your musicality. So like what you choose to do with like an EQ curve, it could be musical to you and not to me, in the same way that like some people prefer this EQ over that EQ in the analog realm. Do you think your experience as a mastering engineer working in like a bunch of different styles kind of has developed your taste in a manner where you might have a musical taste for your choices that maybe fits the broad range of ears out there? Does that make sense? It's kind of a weird question.
Yes and no. I mean, yes, 100% yes. I feel like the subject you're touching on, I think, is the change that we're seeing in terms of like the small companies and stuff.
Yeah.
Because if you look to the early days of plugins, it was mainly kind of a utilitarian device, or like a very technical device where like you have, if you take like an EQ, for example, you have like a frequency, a Q, and a gain knob. And that EQ either is trying to sound as transparent as possible, which a lot of the early digital plugins tried to achieve, or it has a sound, but the sound is usually kind of modeled after one particular, outboard EQ that everybody wants, like a Pultec or like an SSL or something. And I feel like we got to a point where everybody has all those tools. It's like it's built into all the programs. You get it for free sometimes. it's just there for everyone. And I feel like that's a great thing because now we're at a point where we can really go crazy. And that's kind of what I was aiming for with Safari is like to answer your question, it has like a sound. It's curated to tailor, to the sounds that I like and I hope other people like. But it feels to me more like, I don't mean to sound I don't know, like full of myself, but it kind of, to me, it feels more like an artist releasing music these days than just a, like a company trying to create an EQ that works for everyone. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, that explanation, but I feel inspired and I like other people doing that same thing. Like when I open up a plugin and it has like a specific taste that somebody kind of put in there, I feel that is much more inspiring and fun to work with than these like kind of very professional and bland sounding plugins.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of the engineers or mixers that I know that have done a plugin, it's somehow related to them wanting to do something that fits into their workflow. So it's like exactly what you're talking about. It's like,
Right.
this is very specific to the way that I like to work. And it's kind of cool. So I'm going to share
Yeah.
it with other people. And if they like it, that's cool. If you don't like it, that's cool. So I think it's an interesting comparison, the artist releasing music thing, because yeah, I like that. I like that idea. Makes me want to make a plugin.
I feel like as an engineer, like to be honest, up to the point where I released the plugins, I mean, I didn't have I didn't have this concept in my mind, but once I released it, I kind of felt like an artist because it was like I worked on this thing for a bunch of months and nobody kind of knew about it, and then I released it, and sort of similar like to artists releasing their first kind of album, they're always, kind of really keen on releasing it. And then they usually think that, oh, the world's going to kind of listen to this great album that I've been working on for months now. And usually the reaction is way slower
Yeah.
in terms of like exposure and, getting reactions from people and getting plays and stuff. And I felt the same way. I was like, the plugins are out. And nobody
Just out into the
cared.
abyss.
It was like, yeah, just like 2 website views per day for the first like week or something. And it took time. And it still is like, a small kind of exposure. But
Yeah.
it was really interesting. Like it was a really interesting experience for me because I swear to God, like I looked back at all those like albums that I made with indie musicians releasing their first album, and I felt like, oh, I really like I have a much better understanding of what you went through. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I feel that way about the podcast sometimes. And yeah, when you start putting something out there, you start to relate more with the quote clients that you've maybe mixed or mastered for over the years. And you start to like feel like what that journey's like. But it's something that I've noticed that you do that is maybe this is a little inspired by this parallel to releasing music, is you've been consistently putting plugins out like every 2 or 3 months. Like I feel like you've been moving fast. You keep giving people something
every
new.
Month. Every month.
It is every month. I didn't want to say every month because that feels a little crazy, but I know it's been fast.
Yeah.
Is that partially inspired by the Spotify release? Like you got to keep giving people stuff, keep spreading word.
You're bang on. I mean, I felt like that was a strategy I wanted to take early on. Like I didn't know if I could make it that fast, but yeah, I planned on doing that before I even started the releasing the first plugin. And I feel like it matches today's kind of pace and it's 100% inspired by artists and musicians that I respect that release music on a constant basis. And I feel like a lot of times you feel that movement from artists or even from podcasts as well. Like
Yeah.
there are a few podcasts that like when you see the amount of of releases, you feel like you want to be part of that kind of wave of things happening. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like, as you're releasing more and more, I mean, I talk about it on the podcast all the time. You're growing with every plugin. Just it's like I would imagine the things that you've learned putting out what do you have the Space Echo Vibe, the limiter, the delay, well, 5 plugins, right? So what you've learned over the last year putting out 5 plugins, you've probably accelerated years of growth that
Yeah,
other people who have just done like one plugin a year, like you just
I get what you're saying. I think that like a big part of it also relates to my experience as kind of a music facilitator of sorts, like somebody that was around a lot of musicians and was around a lot of creators, and you kind of get this sense of like I could spend another even year on a specific project,
yeah.
or I can release it and kind of see what people reactions are and then kind of try and improve after releasing it. And I think that's another amazing thing that plugins have that even like music doesn't have, which is like, just for example, like I released the Fox Echo Chorus and then I got like 20 emails of people saying like, why isn't there a width knob? I wish there was a width knob. And I added a width knob and it's there now.
That's awesome.
I guess I could have thought about it like earlier, but I feel like, as long as you don't do something terrible and release it, it's better to just go with the flow, release something that you feel is right early on, and then change it if needed. And also, kind of like you said, learn for the next plugin and kind of get more. It's also like a business strategy because I get a better sense of what the clients or customers like and what they don't like. So the flamingo verb, for example, is my best seller. So I'm thinking about making another reverb. It's a
Yeah.
lot of really good insights, I feel.
Yeah, yeah, you get instant feedback.
Um,
That's something I always tell artists like, you know, put put a couple songs out before you spend all this money and time making a record. Like what if your fans really love it when it's piano good, like when it's broken down, and they don't like it when it's heavy? Like you get that feedback when something's out in the world.
I agree with you so much, and I also feel like I don't know. I have this whole theory about intuition and how music should be intuition based. And what I mean by that is like that's how I used to mix when I was doing a lot of mixing. I would try to kind of get to a point where the song as a whole sounds pretty good after like 30 minutes of mixing. And then obviously it takes more time to kind of hone on different instruments and like finish the mix, but you're looking at like a broad picture of how the audience would look at it. I try to get that same approach with the plugins because, you know, you know how it is. Like it's the same thing with anything like inspired based where like you see a plugin, you click on it, it gives you some sort of reaction. Like you like it, you don't like it. The first few seconds for most people, I think, would probably lead to either buying it or not.
Oh yeah,
And
for
it's
sure.
the same like with music. Like you hear the first few seconds and you kind of you get attached to it or you want to skip the song.
I mean, I have definitely demoed a plugin that has just been perfect and just really exciting for the thing that I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna try this plugin," and then probably never used it again, but bought it immediately because, like, it gave me everything I wanted in that first 10 seconds for that moment, you know? And, so, yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. This kind of parallels something I wanted to ask you about. I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were just talking about plugins or hardware or gear or whatever,
Right.
and, he said something which I never really, put together. He was like, "The audio industry is very different from the music industry." And I was like, "Oh, wow." Yeah, like, because as an
Mm.
engineer, you think about, like, plugins are my tools that I make music with, but you never really, like, separate audio products from the use of those products. How have you kind of walk that line of what works in the audio industry versus what works in the music industry. You know what I mean? Are there parallels? Are they different? What do you think?
There are a few differences and there are a few similarities. I feel the biggest difference is the audio industry, in my opinion, is a much more technical industry in the sense that it's tech oriented. So there's a lot of innovation and changes and things that are happening quicker.
Yeah.
And I feel like the music industry is more like intellectual property when you strip it down.
Okay.
So it's more old school and has a lot of rules that never changed, like mechanical rights. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah.
these things that just exists and everybody accepts them because it's just what it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's like the biggest difference that I feel. But then I also feel like there's a middle ground, and that middle ground is sort of something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, is the fact that so many people are doing so many things combined. So, for
Mhm.
example, I used to be a mastering engineer. Now I'm working as a company owner, and there's like a vlogger who does mixing, and he also produces, and he also writes a song, and there's like a mixture that is much more mixed than what it used to be. Because when I was starting out, a producer was a producer. He wouldn't usually record the band. He would
Yeah.
produce it, and then there's different tasks, and it was very, very separated. And these days it's so mixed up that there are pros and cons to it, but I just feel like it's a new world
There's definitely a new
where
world.
the rules don't really apply anymore.
Yeah. That is true.
I feel like another fascinating thing is in this new world there are things that are staying from the old one, and they're like totally new concepts, and seeing them like merge together, I feel like is super interesting. I don't know.
You're totally right. Like everything, there's so many people that are making technical things that are also like creatives. There's people that are writing or whatever. There's so much intermingling. There feels like so many things you have to do, I think. Do you think that for people that are
Yeah.
just coming to music and they're just starting their music journey, do you think the fact that everything is so intermingled now is like kind of empowering to those people? Or do you think it's a little daunting because you feel like, oh shit, I have to produce my own record and record it and mix it and master my record. I have to make my own artwork. Or is it like exciting because you get to do it all? I don't really have an opinion. I'm just curious what you think.
I have to be honest. I feel like it's more daunting, and I'll tell you why. I feel like there used to be a few types of people that these days, kind of in a sad way, don't really get to do their craft.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is like I feel like if you're starting out right now, like you said, you have to know all these things. Like you could be a songwriter, but that's cool. But you need to know how to record at least in a basic level of recording at home,
Yeah.
and you probably need to know a bunch of other things as well. And there are lost arts in this kind of blend of things, and one of them, in my opinion, is mixing. To be honest, like I feel like old styles of mixing, where you get like a song a day, and you really kind of just do that, is I won't say gone. It's not gone. It's still there, but it's like it's not happening so frequently as it used to be.
Yeah.
And I feel like these days, if even if a producer goes to a mixing engineer, um, it's a different approach where like it used to be like, hey, this is the production, keep going from there. Like I'm not done yet. And I feel like nowadays it's more about like, hey, I'm done. Like in terms of mixing as well. Like I blended everything in. It sounds the way I want it. Please don't change it, and maybe make it like 5% better.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Which is it's a different craft.
It's so different. I agree with that completely. Mixing. I don't want to demean my own career path, but if you're mixing great productions, it's almost like STEM mastering. I mean, you're just looking to fix some problems and bring some clarity because it already sounds fucking great. Like, so what are you
Yeah.
doing? You're the only thing you can do is give that extra 5 or 10%, and then you pass it on to the master engineer that adds that other 2 or 3% on top of that. I mean, but that's just, I think that's the tier of client that eventually you end up working with those people. I think early on in your career, you're going to find that as a mixer, you can be way more heavy-handed because everybody involved in the process, they're making their first record and they're all exploring what they want. Nobody really knows. I think that's a bit more carte blanche, I guess, is an acceptable term to use there. But after like 15,
Yeah,
20
I agree
years,
with what you're saying.
yeah,
Like,
you know what I mean?
I think like it's interesting. It's interesting what you're saying because I'm looking back at my career and I'm thinking maybe I felt that way towards the end of my mixing career because I was doing great productions and great mixes. I'm not great mixes, but like great productions and great, musicians. Um, that's a
Yeah.
good point.
But to go back to the initial question, I don't think it's like a loss of um it's not a lost art. I think when people step into this industry and they're overwhelmed by the number of things that they have to learn or start doing, I think it's more of a
Mm.
loss of like expertise. You know, like when you and I started,
Yeah.
maybe like I could focus on just being an engineer. I didn't have to worry about these other things. But if I were to leave school now and start now, I don't think I'd be able to focus on just the one thing. There'd be too many things that I need to do to really reach the point that I reached in like 10 years. It might take 20, 25 years to learn all those things. You know what I mean? I think that sucks for people because they can't focus on the thing.
I also think that there's like I totally agree with what you're saying. And I also think that there's another aspect to it where like when you're starting out, you don't really know to differentiate between people telling you what's right and what's wrong. And I was like, in that sense, I was really lucky because I was working in a big studio early on.
Yeah.
So I only had like 2 or 3 opinions. It was like the studio manager, the studio owner, and the 2 engineers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was it.
Yeah.
And I feel like nowadays when you finish school or whatever you start working, you go on YouTube and there's so many different like approaches, opinions, things to read about, and you don't really know, what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm kind of experiencing that as a side thing where I'm learning how to edit video just for Safari pedals, and I'm trying to get a grasp of it, but like there's too much information. It's like I don't know who to trust, and there's like this guy who's saying one thing, and then the other guy is saying the opposite. I kind of feel like that's probably how people are experiencing, starting their careers in music or in audio because it's saturated with opinions.
Yeah. Well, I think most cases, I don't think that there are too many rules that have to be followed. There's definitely rules that need to be followed, but if you're talking about like creative distortion or something like that, I understand there being 10,000 opinions on YouTube. But yeah, it is. I've done the same thing. I've gone down the rabbit hole of Adobe Premiere stuff and color correction and stuff like that
Yeah.
for the podcast. And yeah, I guess
That's exactly
daunting.
what I'm talking about, man.
Right. There's so
Color
many
correction
opinions.
is heavy shit, man.
Yeah.
Color correction is so hard, and like I was sure it was easy. Like when I started, I was like, oh,
Did you think it was
yeah,
like
I can do
EQ?
this
Were you
color
like, this is
correction
just like
thing.
EQ? That's how I thought about it.
Yeah, I felt like exactly. I felt like I got this. You know what I mean? And then it's kind of similar like within audio where like a lot of times you feel like you sound great, and then you listen to a reference and you're like, actually, it sounds terrible.
Yeah.
And I feel that way with color correction. Like I feel like I'm doing great, and then I look at like a different video and I'm like, oh no, this is so bad.
Well, but then you get on the rabbit hole of
It's
like, oh, is it the
hilarious.
camera? Should I get another camera? It's the same way with gear. You're like, oh, that mix is so good.
Yeah.
Oh, they used a summing mixer. I should probably get a summing mixer. And then you just like, there you go. You start tumbling
But
down the hill.
I know this is gonna sound dumb to some people, but I've never experienced that in audio. Like, I don't know, maybe because I started really early, like I started as a kid, so I had other people's opinions like laid on me.
Yeah.
But I never felt like this kind of rabbit hole you're expressing where it's like, oh yeah, maybe I need a camera, maybe I need a new mic, maybe I need this, maybe I need that. It was always kind of, I don't know. But yeah, now now I feel that way with video cameras, and I can totally relate to people experiencing that in audio. Like, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure,
Because, you know,
100%.
the people with the widest reach aren't necessarily in a, you know, the most experienced, not necessarily giving bad information either, but
No, but that's the thing. Like when you like look at the people kind of creating these vlogs and stuff, a lot of them are great. I like a lot of them, but a lot of them are talking with no experience. They're like, here's 5 compression tips you need to know. And like, dude, you're working like on 6-inch KRKs that you just bought. Like you started this whole thing like 6 months ago. Like
yeah.
maybe don't
Yeah.
start with giving other people tips. You know what I mean?
Well,
Again, I'm not trying to hate anyone, but I just feel like if you're a newbie and you really don't know the difference, like you don't know a difference between like a KRK speaker and I don't know, like a ATC pair or whatever, like or like a Neumann mic and I don't know,
yeah.
like
I'm with,
you're
well,
not in this whole world,
yeah,
you
exactly.
can get really confused.
Yeah, and there's things that take a long time. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's an engineer out there that would say I learned compression in a year right when I started. Like to like understand compression, you're
Exactly.
talking about years and years and years of experience. Just eat for great engineers,
Yeah.
for people that have done this for a long time, they will admit like, oh yeah, this clicked for me when I was like 29. I just happened to make it that far. You know what I mean?
Listen, like, yeah, the compression thing, like, I'll never forget the experience of sitting behind an engineer and seeing him like tweaking the compressor and thinking to myself, like, either he's like insane because I don't hear any difference, or I'm like brain dead or something because like there is no like I literally did not hear any difference, and it took me a very long time to actually understand
Yeah.
compression.
Yeah. Well,
Not sure I do.
it was speaking to like I'm going to make an interesting parallel here. You know, you like we'll just say YouTube creators that are like sharing tips or whatever. People go because they resonate with that person regardless of their experience level in the same way that they're going to choose like a Safari pedal plugin over a insert some other brand whatever, because there's something about that person or that company that they resonate with, which is also like kind of interesting to think about because it's like, well, it's not, I don't know. I think people are people are drawn to different things for different reasons. And, you know, from the outside looking in, it's easy to be like, oh, these are bad tips. But like some kid is getting something out of that. Maybe it's, you know, maybe 20% wrong
Yeah.
or something like that. Anyway, just talking about like, you know, musical taste and choosing what a knob does and like
No, no, no.
making a plugin. It's
You're
weird to think
right.
about that when you think about like tips or like TikTok accounts or some nonsense like that. So it's weird.
I totally agree, and I feel like also you touched on something that I really resonate with, which is like you usually relate to things that you think are like how did you phrase it? Like a lot of times you'll watch something because you feel it's relatable to you, or you
Yeah.
feel like you're like on the same kind of wave of that person,
Yeah.
and that makes a lot of sense. And again, I think the way people these days are like young producers, engineers, musicians approach, you know, this whole world is totally different than how we as or me as a bald person with kids looks at all these TikTok accounts and stuff. And I'm not trying to like, I take back, any kind of negativity, because I feel like it's not my kind of wave. You know what I mean? It's not something that's made for me. So it
Yeah.
makes sense that I don't understand it.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I feel like you would probably agree. Like, I'm more drawn to like a Mix with the Masters style video than I am like,
Yeah.
a tips TikTok account. Like I think it's because,
Yeah.
that generation, we learned from people like that. And so like when I want to go learn, I want to go to those people again. When I think now kids are so self-taught, having their iPad in their hand, making beats on GarageBand since they were like 6, that like it's all about their peers for them and who they like, not necessarily like
Yeah.
not their idols or their inspirations. It's a different mentality. I think
Yeah, that's so true. It's more of like that. That's so true. It's more of like a social thing than how we look at it, where it's more of like looking up to someone and, wanting to just learn from.
right.
I totally agree. I feel like it's more about it's less about learning and it's more about socialization, which also makes sense because there are no like physical places where you hang out anymore. It's like you hang out on TikTok or
Yeah.
Instagram or
Everybody's
something.
got a studio in their backyard,
Unfortunately.
So yeah, you don't
Yeah.
have that same community that you had like 30 years ago, where the only place to make a record was in one of the 10 studios in town. And so that's where everybody met everybody, that's where you learned
Yeah,
stuff.
and you used to like I'm sure you experienced this as well. Like I used to work in one room and then, you open the door to eat lunch and you see a guy that you I don't know, like met last week and he's like, you want to hear something cool in the other room, and you go to the other room and you're like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
you mic the drums that way. That's cool.
Totally.
I'm gonna try that one time.
Yeah. I mean, I used to get off work at Capitol and just stay. You're just like, I'm just going to stay here.
Exactly. I feel like that's our equivalent to TikTok.
Yeah. Yeah. Staying at the studio till 3:00 in the morning, like talking nonsense with like the tech about like, well, how he fixed something, or like going through the other rooms, checking out like, oh,
Yeah.
that's how they're EQing this. That's cool. Like looking at the console at the end of the night, be like, what'd they do? Where'd they move the mics?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're lucky that we had access to that though, which is, it's much harder to find these days.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like for you, I mean, I mean, I did the same thing, but I'm from Tel Aviv, so I didn't have Capital. I had the equivalent version of the Middle East, which is not as glamorous, But still, yeah.
I love walking in my backyard and having a studio in my backyard. And like, I follow plenty of TikTok accounts and I enjoy watching or whatever, but I do miss like going into a studio for 6 days in a row, hanging out afterwards, chatting with everybody.
Yeah.
I still like to get out every once in a while and hit one of those rooms, but maybe I'm just getting old. I also like to sit in my backyard. So
100%. I was actually like reminiscing on this. I was like talking to a friend before we started the podcast on a session I did in like a really nice room with a Neve console that we worked on for like 3 weeks in a row.
nice.
And that just doesn't happen anymore.
No.
It used to be so fun. Like you finish the session, you go have drinks, da 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 da. It's like a whole thing. It's like a phase in your life.
Yeah.
Of like a few long weeks,
You make a record with somebody for a couple weeks, a couple months, like you're friends with that person for forever because you guys
Yeah.
made art together. And I think people, I have like friends that have made records with, plenty of famous people, and they still talk to them, years later. And I think like if you're on the outside of the music industry, you're like, you text famous people? And you're like, well, yeah, we're friends. We made a record for like 4 months. Like we're it's cool. It's fine. But yeah, I did want to
Yeah.
ask you before we go. I wanted to ask you one thing, since we're kind of talking about our studio experiences. You and I both have had
Sure.
very stable salary moments in our lives where we've, you know, we're making music and we know we're having a fixed income, and we both chose to leave those situations. You at Artlist doing mastering and
Hmm.
all the audio stuff. Do you have any advice for people that are maybe like, even if they don't even work in music, maybe they work, I don't know, at a coffee shop, but they feel like they can make it full time in music? They're like at that point where they're like, I think I need this money, but I also think I need to go do that. Do you have any advice for people that are like right there at the precipice that are like, I think I want to work for myself?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think two things. The first one is actually part of the reason why I left my day job and decided to start this weird company called Safari. um, the first thing is I kind of got to a realization that it doesn't matter the salary that I would get. Like, even if it is a very high salary, it still does not compare at all to having an asset. I think that's like a really big lesson that I wish I learned earlier in my career, where like I would always choose having an asset over like fixed payment. And it doesn't matter, like you can make that same mistake as a freelancer as well, where you'd be like, no, I don't want points on this record. I just want you to pay up front. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what I can tell you looking back is those points and all these like different types of assets, they accumulate and they can really like, be a very big investment in your own life and in your own self. And sometimes you don't see it at the point of time that you're actually making the decision.
Yeah.
So after having like a very long time with the salary, I realized it. I was like, yeah, I don't see how I can keep this thing going for another like 40 years, or I don't know, like 30 years or whatever number of years. And I can't guarantee it, but I can probably guarantee if I can manage to create an asset that continues to create revenue for me in the following years, that seems like a better plan.
Yeah.
And maybe hopefully things that I can even transfer to my kids,
That's awesome.
That's one thing. And then the second thing is just like, it's going to sound kind of cliche, but I really believe in like going with your heart. And I feel like if you're honest to yourself and you're like really 100% like trying to be honest with yourself and not lying to yourself, good things happen. It's just like the way I've experienced life, since early on. And
Yeah.
I felt like I wasn't honest with myself anymore as like being an employee. Like I loved working at Artlist till the last day, but I just felt like there was something in me that was really wanting to kind of get out and express myself and do wild plugins. So I felt like I had to go with that, and I had to trust my gut feeling and just do what I love, which
Yeah.
is something that a lot of times is like the opposite of what everybody's telling you to do. Like usually people are telling you like, yeah, don't trust your instincts. Go with whatever is like socially acceptable. Like you have a job, don't quit the job, dude. Have a
Yeah.
good job. You know what I mean?
I agree completely. And I mean, I think you've got to trust your gut. I mean, we started this podcast. I said there was like a glitch in Riverside, and I was like, every time my gut has said I need to restart Riverside, and I haven't, I've had a
Yeah.
chunk of my interview missing. And that's something that multiple producers and engineers that I've worked with have said. Like after I've made a mistake, they've been like, "What did your gut tell you right before that happened?" And I was like, "Not to do that." And they were like, "Yeah." And you're like,
Mm.
mm-hmm, yeah. I don't know, something of that gut, something in trusting your instincts. Dude, this has been so much fun. I got to ask you the last two questions before we head out. The first one, which maybe we touched on a little bit, is: was there a time in your career that you chose to redefine what success meant to you?
I feel like I kind of answered that, to be honest, with Safari pedals, because my kind of goal for success early on was I want to work with these like 10 artists that I wish I could. And then once I reached that in my little world, I was like, okay, now what? And the next kind of goal change was I want to have a steady income because I'm having kids. I want to have like a day job, which is something that's pretty rare as an engineer. Like, it's not something that you usually experience. And once I got that, after a few years, I felt like I want to create assets, which is kind of the thing that is happening now. So.
That's awesome. Yeah. And then I know you have a company and you have products in the works, so maybe you can't share everything with us, but what is your current biggest goal and what's the next smallest step you're going to go to take towards it?
I think my biggest goal is to find a way to kind of get Safari to a point where it feels like I'm on like a safe island where it feels like everything is working and I don't have to push the boat anymore so hard.
Right.
Because right now, which is obvious, it's predictable. Like I knew this and I wasn't expecting anything else. But I wake up in the morning and whatever I do or don't do is going to be the outcome of Safari pedals. Like if I don't answer all the emails and if I don't plan the next plugin and if I don't do the video, then it's not going to happen. And I guess my long-term goal is to get to a point where it's an actual company with other people that do other things. And I don't have to do everything myself.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Dude, this has been a lot of fun. People should definitely check out the plugins. I've been enjoying them. Please take a second, share with people whatever you want. This is your little spotlight moment.
Yeah, you should check out safaripedals.com and try the plugins. I feel like if there's like a message that I'm trying to convey and push forward is people should go crazy and just be creative and do your thing and don't be afraid of anything. Just be yourself, be a studio animal, which is like a line that I made up for Safari pedals. And see you on the other side.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time. I know.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I was just about to say, like, I really appreciate the podcast. I'm a listener as well. And it was great talking to you. And you're an awesome host. And yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I don't know if I'm awesome, but we're trying to have a good time here. But yeah, awesome. I look forward to this compressor slipping out into the world. I'm definitely going to check that out. And yeah, man, we'll have to definitely keep in touch.
Amazing.
That's it for this week's episode of Progressions. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Be sure to check out all the links and resources mentioned in the episode down below in the video description or in your podcast show notes. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, please leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It helps the show so much. And if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to drop any thoughts or questions about the episode down below. Let's keep the conversation going. For those of you watching, you'll be getting a link to another episode you might enjoy popping up somewhere right about now. And for those of you listening, check out the YouTube. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I will see y'all next time.